Hi folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Beretta 92FS. In particular, this Beretta 92FS that dates back to 1994 and is a police special model. It's interesting to me because it has some of the features that were discontinued by Beretta quite some time ago, where many things now on the later 92 series handguns are quite a bit different. And this really showcases that more classic pre-2000 era of handguns that we've kind of lost over the years. Not necessarily in bad ways, but I think everyone can acknowledge that over the years, handguns have changed since this had its heyday back in the 80s. But this one's in 1994, so missed the 80s, but still definitely a pre-millennium handgun. So it is an FS. I don't want to get too involved into the different Beretta models from the original 92 in 1975, but this comes a couple decades later, and so it has the FS changes to it that occurred incrementally. But the earlier models, they had the frame mounted safety, they had the magazine release back here in the more European style. Of course, the safety decocker on the slide became commonplace. That was implemented. The magazine release here at the back of the trigger guard that we're more used to, as Americans anyway, more used to, was implemented. So this has those updates. It has the enlarged hammer pin. Those things that occurred, basically bringing it to a wider military and police market. Beretta implemented those changes to be able to do that. But this one in particular is a police special. It came with factory night sights on it, and that's the reason I know it's in 1994 is I didn't call Beretta up, and you can't really see it, they're so faded now, but the sights are 1994, and since they're factory sights, that's how I date the gun. You know they haven't been changed, or at least most likely haven't been changed, because the sights on these are not removable. Well, the rear sight is removable. The front sight, though, is actually built into the slide. If you ever want to put new night sights on these, that has to be drilled out and a new lamp installed. You can't just swap sights. So these being 1994 sights with the original lamps, they're dim. Really, really dim. They don't glow at all really anymore. You can kind of perceive it in a dark room if you hold your eye right up to it, but there's no effective illumination left on the night sights. But the metal's still there. Pistol still shoots great. This is if you haven't shot a Beretta full-size handgun like this, they are wonderful to shoot. Fantastic on the range. They're a little bit big. They're a little bit heavy for what at the time was a 15-round 9mm handgun. They've increased magazine capacity over the years, but at the time of introduction, 15 rounds plus one, it's a whole lot of handgun for 15 rounds of 9mm. It is a 9mm handgun, of course, but it has some of the early features that I think are kind of cool. It makes it a little bit nostalgic, kind of harkens back to that pre-millennium era of the handgun. A lot of metal. Of course, the frame on these, some folks will say it's a steel frame. It's an aluminum frame. Not all metal is steel. So it has an aluminum alloy frame that takes the weight down some, but you still have that feeling of metal. A lot of the small parts that have since been switched to plastic are metal on this handgun. So let's take a look at some of that. But before we go too far, let's go back to the frame, because I don't want to overlook something here, because I'll forget if I don't talk about it now. One of the first things that you can tell at a glance that indicates that this is an earlier handgun is right here. Now this area is called the dust cover. This metal doesn't really need to be here for any structural reason to speak of. Up at the front, all that's doing is keeping dirt and junk out of the recoil spring, really. But this is straight. And later models of the 92FS, this is curved. They beefed up this area here where the locking block hits internally whenever the slide is returning forward. So this earlier thin type it's been out of production for quite some time, as far as I'm aware. This is old. So not as robust, but I think it really is kind of nice in that it has that sleek profile there, very classic appearance. I think a little bit less obvious, at least unless you pick it up, is that the back strap here is full profile. The newer ones later on, they undercut this some to give you a little bit better reach for the trigger for people with smaller hands. So this is the original full profile, big old grip. It's an overall pretty big handgun. The grips that came on this when I got it, being a police special, this one I think was surplus out of Chicago. Not sure about that, but I think that's where it came from. But it had some hoe grips on it, wraparound type. I'm not sure if those were factory or not, but I put on some of the Beretta plastic stock grips just because I didn't find the extra bulk to be desirable. I didn't really care for the finger grooves, and it's my handgun, and I wanted the Beretta logos on them that look nice. You can tell it's got a little bit of wear and tear to it from just riding around a holster for a while, but not too bad. I think a very nice classic look there. Went with new grip screws too. The old ones were quite corroded, and so these are little Allen wrench sized screws that look pretty good. Almost looks like they're riveted on. But let's take a look at some of the small parts. The magazine release is metal, steel. The safety decocker is steel. The trigger is steel. The takedown lever here is lower profile. Some of the later ones, and maybe some of the earlier ones, I'm not sure exactly how they determined which ones got what, but it has this lower profile. Maybe that's because it's a police special model. Not entirely sure. But it has the lower profile takedown lever, which is, if your hands are oily, it's a little bit inconvenient getting it apart, but it doesn't stick out, so kind of nice in that regard. It has I believe this is aluminum, but metal nonetheless. The aluminum, I'm going to call it aluminum, cap over the mainspring back here. So some of the parts now that have gone to plastic, steel on this. The other one that we're going to take it apart real quick to look at is internal. I'll just take the slide off. That's just by pressing the little lock button there, flipping that down. You don't have to pull the trigger or anything. There's your frame, and you can see the area here where that locking block slams during return to battery. Right there behind the little takedown pin goes through. So some holes through this part, just adding more material there helped beef up the design a little bit. You see it has fairly generous frame rails here. You got a section there, section here, section back here. You can see the top of that enlarged hammer pin that makes it an FS model. But overall, fairly typical of what you'd expect just with the old steel parts and that aluminum part instead of the newer plastic. Now the other one that's interesting is it has a solid steel unfluted guide rod. It's actually manufactured in two pieces. It has this little bump on the end here that's pinned on. But other than that, solid, unfluted steel. The newer ones are plastic with flutes, which is apparently an improvement. That if this is, I'll throw it back together real quick while we're talking about it so I can demonstrate that. Now that I've shown you that steel guide rod, one of those instances where switching to plastic may not necessarily be a bad thing. Of course, it keeps the weight down, which you may or may not want, since having some more weight out front can help with muzzle flip. But apparently, if you drop this handgun while it is in a slide locked open position onto the muzzle essentially, but onto that guide rod, and it bends, well then the slide can't go back forward. So just something to kind of think about there. Going to plastic is not necessarily always a corner cutting measure. Sometimes there is actually benefit to it. And plastic guide rods, of course, all they're doing is guiding the spring. They don't really easily wear out or break if they're decently well made, which as far as I've seen the Beretta ones, they are. So here's the heart and soul of the Beretta 92 that makes it pretty interesting. It is the locking block. What an interesting mechanism. And of course, this is borrowed from the Walther P38. It has, in this pistol, if I can get it out, a Generation 2 locking block. They're on to the Generation 3 now, where this channel in the back would not be so wide. It's a good bit narrower, but it is different in that it has these cuts back here, these radiuses, whereas the Generation 1 kind of came back square, and you had a spot there that could very easily develop a fracture. You have those 90-degree turns, and that is where you tend to get cracks. So by cutting this in, it actually has less material, but by giving it that nice rounded corner there, you reduce that risk of a fracture developing at the corner. So a more durable locking block. You can see this one has some wear on it, but still working fine. I may change it out someday, but probably don't need to. Unfortunately, I just don't shoot this as much as I used to. For a while, I shot it a lot, but you know, you find other things that draw your attention. Still a great handgun to shoot, though. I mean, they really do handle well, and maybe that's why I don't shoot it very much, is because it is so effortless to just shoot it well. There's not much challenge in it. It is a big, heavy 9mm where it has this linear locking and unlocking action that, to me, just, it feels smooth when it cycles. I know that's kind of a subjective thing, but I think folks that shoot probably know what I'm talking about. When you're firing something and it just cycles smoothly, you can feel the lack of clunking around in your hand. Now, one thing I do like about the 92 is the safety, actually. Now, these days I'm more of a fan of not having a manual safety. I would prefer this probably be the G configuration, where it is a decocker only. I do like decockers. I just don't particularly care for having manual safeties on handguns that I carry. But People complain about the decocker on these, on the safety, and I don't think it's a big deal. I think what people are doing is they're using it probably differently than I do, where they're pushing it up, and you really don't have to push it up. You just kind of push forward, just flick down. Like if I just push down on it, it flips up. It's spring loaded to return up. So as long as you get it off the detent, boom, easy. But I really like what Beretta did on the design here, because if you look at the older P38, it actually, the safety decocker arrests the firing pin. It actually blocks it. Now, the Beretta does have a firing pin block to act as a drop safety, but as far as the decocker goes, you actually have a firing pin extension here that whenever you're decocking it, before it trips the hammer, it's swung that firing pin extension up out of the way. You can see it there, I think, moving up to where when the hammer falls, it just hits the slide. It doesn't actually hit the firing pin extension. So you don't have that risk of, for one, something breaking and the thing actually firing. For two, breaking components just by slamming the hammer into a firing pin that can't move. Whenever this hammer drops, it stops on the slide. So to me, that's a really clever design aspect, a good way to improve on what Walther came up with. Really nice. Now, I talked about how well they shoot. They're also a very robust handgun. And what I mean by that, because people will complain, oh, the locking blocks break. Well, yeah, eventually if you don't, well, eventually everything breaks, but if you keep these up, if you change out the recoil springs, it's actually not that bad. Now, they have, of course, this open slide design where, yeah, it can get crud in there. Not as bad, I don't think, as people sometimes say, but yeah, it can get crud. This is probably not the best adverse conditions pistol. The locking blocks, or the locking block, the two wings of the locking block are visible right there through the top of the slide. So your locking surfaces are exposed. Now, it can kind of work crud out that way, but I think it's definitely better to keep it out to begin with. So not ideal as far as that goes, but it's beautiful, isn't it? So at least it looks good. But this particular handgun, I have shot so many different bits of junk ammo that I found where it's had case failures, it's had all kinds of stuff. And what usually happens is it blows the grip out, the trigger bar comes hanging out the side. You loosen these up, you kind of fish that back out, line it back up again, put everything back together, and it keeps on going. It doesn't blow the extractor off or anything. It's actually kind of built like a tank as far as handling ammunition problems goes. Now, of course, you shouldn't shoot random junk ammo you find in the trash can at the range or whatever, but you know, sometimes you're young and poor and you do things. So it can actually handle stuff like that, which to me is really cool. This thing is a real workhorse. It's just a beast of a gun. Yeah, it can get dirt down in it, but if you're just taking it to the range and shooting it, man, it's a chunk. It's fun to shoot. It's smooth. It's accurate. The trigger is pretty good for what it is. And of course, there's stuff people do now to really deck these out. But for a mass-produced police issue handgun, which is what this was created as, this particular one, it's great. It shoots great. It handles great. It's robust. It's very forgiving. The only thing that's ever broken on it is it did break the pointer here. it did break the trigger spring, just kind of out of the blue one day, but you know, things get old. It happens. I don't know how many rounds have been through this pistol. I've shot it quite a bit. It wasn't brand new by any means when I got it, but it did break. And so I switched it out to this coil type that I think the Border Patrol actually requested. It was like 20 bucks or something years ago, and has been great ever since. So if you have an older 92, might be worth looking into that. I think Wolf Gun Springs sells them. Nice little upgrade to improve something that is kind of a weak link in a lot of handguns. Those torsion type springs that are commonplace, they just don't last forever. They like to throw a leg off of them. So slick to take apart. This one is a little bit dry right now because I didn't want it to be all oily showing it to you, but whenever they're lubed up, they're just so smooth. Actually, I've got oil on my fingers from wiping it down, so I can't. But I love having this here where you can kind of just pop the slide back a little bit. Really just a nice handgun to handle. And I don't know why I do that. Probably just because I'm used to the P38s and being careful with them. But you know, there's really no problem in decocking these. It's a very, very robust system. The magazine, as I said, 15 rounds as they came. This one is the one that came with the handgun. And you can definitely tell it's a 1994. Restricted, law enforcement, government use only. So this is a ban era magazine. Made in USA. Oh, and if Martinez is out there, badge number 33928. I don't know if I have your handgun, but I've got your magazine, or at least the floor plate from your magazine. So I don't know exactly. Yeah, I'm sure stuff probably got jumbled up. I doubt they took the magazines apart, so I probably have old Officer Martinez's magazine. He's probably not watching this, but if you are, hello. That's an earlier magazine, definitely dates to approximately the time period of the pistol. It has the aluminum floor plate on it, which was later changed. Interesting to me, it doesn't have the cutout for the older style magazine release, where it was the heel type. So, kind of odd. I'll show you that. This is a later magazine, actually an Italian one, whereas this one's made in the US. But it has the cutout there for the European style release. But plastic floor plate. I think it's steel lined, but I could be wrong. Yeah, it is steel lined. So it has a stamped steel liner in there, but plastic overmolded. Whereas this is a solid aluminum floor plate. Good, reliable magazines. I think that's one thing that Beretta did well with the 92FS. So of course, now everyone likes Glock mags, but the Beretta magazines are good magazines. The reputation they get, of course, folks that have been around for a little while, you remember the issue of Checkmate magazines back during the Iraq, Afghanistan, all that, where they had issues with a subcontractor that was making an aftermarket non-Beretta, non-OEM magazine that had some problems. I've got a few of those I could probably find. They eventually can work, but they are problematic. I personally had problems with some that were surplus, brand new mags, but not really up to par with what you would expect. That's a look at the Beretta 92FS from 1994, police special model. I don't think I missed anything. I kind of got long-winded on this one, but if I did miss something, let me know in the comments. If you like the Beretta or don't like the Beretta, also let me know in the comments, because I'll probably try to defend it, because I I really like it. I think they're a really great gun to shoot. They're very comfortable, very mild, and just a wonderful piece of firearms history. So thanks for watching, folks, and check back later where we take this and look at the P38 side by side and kind of see where this design came from way back in the 1930s. So thanks for watching, and check back in next time.